Women do regret abortion. Men regret lost fatherhood. People who are able to hold a sign like this put the other side of this divisive issue in a very difficult position. Because what has the other side been saying for decades? Listen to the voices of women. That's what they've said in their efforts to promote the so-called choice of abortion. And now, if we heed their advice and we listen to the voices of women, we hear more and more of them saying exactly what's on those signs. I regret my abortion. We hear the men who were led to think that somehow it's a good thing to say to that woman, well, I'm not going to interfere with your choice. It's up to you. He thinks he's saying the right thing, doesn't he? It's up to you. I'll support you, whatever you want to do. But that particular line makes her feel more isolated, not more supported. It makes her feel like now the weight of this life and death decision is only on her shoulders. And his supposed respect for her choice only distances him more from her and makes her feel all the more tempted to resort to abortion. The flip side of rights is responsibilities. If the law takes away the legal right of the father to stop the abortion, well, then it only reinforces the idea that he has no responsibility for that child or for that child's mother. There's only one way forward, brothers and sisters, for men to rise up and to avoid the mistake of the first man. Because when we think of the original sin, don't we think of Eve being deceived by the serpent? But there's another question that has to be asked. God gave Adam the responsibility to guard that garden. And so before we talk about Eve being deceived by the serpent, we've got to ask a question to Adam. Why did the serpent get in there in the first place? Adam, rise up and take responsibility for protecting that woman and her children. Men of our society, rise up and be the protectors and the providers and the supporters that God has given you the strength to be. This is essential in our efforts to end abortion. This is part of our message to our society today. And the men who have failed to do this, they're holding signs about the regret of their lost fatherhood. Now, friends, next week in Washington, D.C., and also in San Francisco, there'll be the Walk for Life, West Coast, and there'll be the March for Life in our nation's capital. At both of those events, we will see this tidal wave. There will be the men and women of the Silent No More Awareness Campaign front and center at both of those gatherings. And as they lead those marches with a voice of experience, they will then, at the conclusion of the marches, get up to podiums like this, one after another. In D.C., it'll be right in front of the Supreme Court, and they will share their testimonies. They will let that power of witness unfold on the crowds. And it's having an effect. You may be aware that former U.S. Senator Zell Miller from Georgia once supported legal abortion, but then he became pro-life while he was still in office. And one of the key factors in his conversion, besides seeing the ultrasound of his grandchild, was seeing those signs. He was impressed deeply by the voices of regret, and he became pro-life because he said, we thought that abortion was helping people, and now we're seeing just the opposite is the case. Kourtney Kardashian, celebrity who became pregnant, said that she read online the testimonies of women like this, and she was crying hysterically as she read about the pain of those who aborted their children, and that strengthened her to get through her pregnancy. And the United States Supreme Court itself, in its 2007 decision about partial birth abortion, actually said the same thing, that it is indisputable that women come to regret their choice of abortion, and that therefore we've got to start paying attention to their voices. It's having an impact. Now, here, in this square, let it have an impact again. And let us bring our courage to meet the courage of these women and men who give testimony by spreading those testimonies. We who are clergy, we who preach the word of God, let us echo their testimonies in our preaching. You who give pro-life talks, echo these testimonies in your speaking, in websites, in blogs, in email, on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, on every means of communication that we have. Let us echo the word of these testimonies, because I am convinced that the day is closer than any of us expect when we will see an end to legal abortion in this country. And one of the key reasons will be that the very people who resorted to it rise up and say, this was a false promise, this was a dead end. There is only one way forward: Jesus Christ, the Lord of life, who gives us the strength to love without prejudice, without discrimination, without exclusion, but rather to welcome and protect all, including the smallest and weakest of our brothers and sisters. Thank you for what you are doing to hasten that day of victory. Debbie, would you come forward and let us hear your testimony? God bless you all. You want it to be up here?
My name is Debbie Capon, and I'm here today as a member of Silent No More Awareness to share my personal experience with abortion. You know, as a little girl, I often dreamed of a life full of adventure, and that along this journey I would meet Mr. Right and have a family. I never dreamed that my journey would bring me to this street corner where I would tell the world that I had had an abortion. The road to my dream life took its first tragic turn when I was 13. My wonderful dad passed away very suddenly. And I'm sure you can agree that teenage years are hard enough to get through, but now I was a daddy's girl without her dad. And his death left a huge hole in my heart that I didn't know how to fill. Rather than find comfort in my faith, I looked to the things and people of this world to fill the void. As years went by, I especially turned to happiness through relationships. I thought that my high school boyfriend would be Mr. Right, and I exchanged my virginity for his affection. It was a bad deal. So I moved on to college without Mr. Right and without my virginity. The summer before my sophomore year of college, I met another candidate for Mr. Right. Again, I made the exchange of myself for affection, and again, it was a bad deal. This time, I would be going back to school without Mr. Right, but with a pregnancy. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. Over and over in my mind, I kept thinking, this isn't supposed to happen to me. This isn't supposed to happen. And I didn't know what to do. So 1 week before I was to pack up and go back to school, I told the father of the child that I was pregnant. He asked me what I was going to do about it. I knew by his response that he saw this as my problem, not his. He did offer to pay for half of the abortion, so I returned to school that fall with $150 in cash and a big decision to make. A week after I moved back to school, I decided maybe the college health center could help me. I went to the front desk and asked for a pregnancy test. The nurse at the desk asked me if I'd already taken a test at home, and she said that if it was positive, it would be a waste of their time to give me another one. I asked if I could talk to someone. Another nurse came out into the waiting room to speak to me. When I realized that they weren't even going to let me pass the front desk, I knew that they could offer me no help. I asked the nurse about abortion, and she said I could just find a clinic in the Yellow Pages. You know, the one person I should have turned to was my mother, but I just couldn't overcome my fear of facing her with this hurtful news. So when I got back to my dorm room, I picked up the Yellow Pages, called an abortion clinic, and made an appointment. The following Saturday, my roommates drove me to Charlotte for the abortion. The abortion experience was like a cattle drive. The other women and I were herded together from room to room, and the only thing I remember about the abortion counselor was that she asked me if I would like a prescription for the birth control pill. So she gave me a starter pack of pills and some antibiotic to take after the abortion. We were then ushered into separate rooms where we waited for the doctor. It was a cold and humiliating experience. The worst part was what they called the recovery room. All the women were put together in a large, dark room where we were placed on cold vinyl beds to wait for the Valium to wear off. I'll never forget the sickening feeling of lying in that room, listening to the moaning of other women, and just wanting to escape as quickly as possible. In the days that followed, I did feel relief. I had wanted the pregnancy to be not true, and I thought it was over. For years, I worked hard to forget that day and pretend it never happened. I finished college, and along the way, I did meet Mr. Right. We were living together in a scenic condo just blocks from this intersection. We were having a wonderful time together and talking about marriage. It seemed like my dream life was right on track. I had finished my degree, had a great job, and a wonderful fiance. So I couldn't understand why I wasn't happy. Finally, I decided that maybe, just maybe, it was because I missed God. I secretly began to pray. And since I was still hiding my sin in the darkness, that's exactly where God came to answer my prayer, in a dark movie theater. My fiance and I were at the movies seeing The Green Mile. In that film, Tom Hanks plays the role of a death row prison guard who must oversee the execution of an innocent man. Even though Hanks's character knows that the gentleman is innocent, he participates in the execution, and it haunts him for the rest of his life. At the end of the film, the prison guard wonders what it will be like at the end of his life when he meets God face to face. Tom Hanks's character says, "What will I say when God asks me, why? Why did you kill my miracle?" Those words hit me like a ton of bricks in that movie theater, because I knew that someday God would ask me that same question. Why did I kill his miracle? And I would have to answer that it was because I was afraid of making room for that child. I went home from the movies, locked myself in the bathroom, and sobbed until I couldn't breathe. I realized that the abortion had not just been about my life, but it was about the life of a child that I couldn't face. All the pain I thought that I had avoided came crashing down on me in that moment. I realized that I had sacrificed the life of another human being just to maintain my status quo. It was more than I could bear. Fortunately, God gave me the grace to return to the Catholic Church. I didn't want to be afraid anymore. I went to the sacrament of reconciliation, and I finally felt the fear drain away. Through the mercy of Christ, I was forgiven and free.